Welcome everyone to our new episode of POLITalks TAMUSA, the Political Science Department's podcast, in which we talk with political scientists and academics, both from here at Texas A&M University in San Antonio and from other universities in the United States and abroad, trying to have an insight into several things, into political science, into political events that are happening as we speak, into new and groundbreaking work on issues in politics, and into the life in academia, to see what these weird and wonderful people who are the faculty in academia, what do they do, how do they live, and why do they choose this profession. Today, as part of this series, I have the great privilege of talking to Dr. Trepanier, who is the Dean of the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences at Assumption University in Worcester, Massachusetts. Welcome, Dr. Trepanier. Welcome, Lee.
Privileged to be here and honored to speak with you.
Awesome. So first of all, tell us a little bit about Assumption University, because we're recording this as a remote. I'm here in Texas, you're there in Massachusetts, and some people might not know about your institution. So what can you share with us about Assumption University?
Sure, I'd be happy to. Assumption University is actually just recently a university. It was Assumption College for many years. It was founded in 1904, and it became a university about 4 or 5 years ago. We have 4 colleges: the College of Graduate Studies, the College of Nursing, the College of Business, and the Amour College of Liberal Arts and Sciences, of which I'm dean. It's a Catholic liberal arts university, still, even though it has expanded to these pre-professional colleges. And it's really, the Catholic liberal arts is at the heart of the student's experience here. Every student here takes what is called the Foundations program. They take 2 classes in literature, 2 classes in theology, 2 classes in philosophy, regardless of what their major is. And then they take additional classes in social sciences, fine arts, and the humanities, and then conclude with a capstone class. After that Foundations program, they then specialize into their major. We're a small university, about a little less than 2,000 students. We have a very close-knit relationship between our faculty and students. I think the faculty-student ratio is something like 8 to 1 or 9 to 1. And it's a very friendly, welcoming place. And we are located in Worcester, as you said before, which is about 20 miles west of Boston. Worcester is the 2nd largest city in New England. It has 8 colleges in the city itself, of which we're one of them. And so it's a very vibrant place to be in. A lot of higher education opportunities for faculty and students here.
Mm-hmm. Sounds great, but this already takes us to one of your sort of specialties, or the things that you've been writing, thinking about, publishing about, which is basically, if I could put it like the philosophy of education, right? Issues in higher education. You've been concerned with this for a long time, and I guess this also has to do with why you have accepted this position as a dean of the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences recently. So from this prism, can you explain to our listeners, to our viewers, what is a Catholic university? Because this might sound a little bit scary, or people don't know what it means.
It's a great question. I think it's, quite frankly, something that people in Catholic higher education are still trying to work through after Vatican II. Prior to Vatican II, there was a pretty clear understanding of what a Catholic university was. It was, at least in the United States, it was students would be well steeped in Thomism, in philosophy and theology, and really learn the teachings of the Church. After Vatican II, there's been a real range of what a Catholic university is. I mean, some are somewhat traditionalist and orthodox in their perspective, such as Steubenville, St. Thomas Aquinas, so on. And there's others that are perhaps, for better or worse, are sort of maybe Catholic in name only. And so I think Assumption holds sort of a middle place between these 2 extremes. We certainly invite students of faith and faculty of faith and examine those questions from a theological and philosophical perspective. At the same time, we're open to the secular world and want to engage in it. So I think at this moment in time, I think for Catholic universities, they are still trying to struggle their way through what it means to be Catholic in this day and age.
Yeah, because that's from the inside perspective of the, obviously of the Catholic higher education. But again, from the outside perspective, someone who's completely unfamiliar with what Catholic universities are might ask, isn't the idea of, okay, you mentioned that you have to be steeped in philosophy and theology and literature to have some, the general education of a certain kind. Doesn't this identity of being Catholic, doesn't it go against the the freedom of a university, the freedom to know, the freedom to discover? What's the relationship between being a university, which is, from the name, it's a universal thing, studying everything, sort of a thing, and the Catholic identity? Is there a clash there? Is this like a sectarian, closed box?
Well, I think from a Catholic perspective, the question you ask is really a question of the relationship between faith and reason. And so from a Catholic perspective, there is a harmony between faith and reason that if you read John Paul's the second encyclical, Fides et Ratio, he speaks of faith and reason being sort of the two wings of a bird that flies, and you need both to have human flourishing. If you have faith by itself, it can sort of devolve into a type of dogmatism, and if you have reason by itself, it sort of can devolve into a type of sterile scientism. And so they help one another to having conversations with each other. They're two different ways of knowing the world that can complement each other, and that are, I would think, from a Catholic perspective, is required for human flourishing. So from a practical perspective, from on the outside, looking at Catholic University, I think what they would say is, this is a place that where, say, religious questions or questions of faith can be addressed in a serious, non-dogmatic way, and also see the limitations of what those questions can be, as well as a Catholic liberal arts university. It really deals with questions of the whole person, of dealing not just it's not just a pre-professional training where you go to college to become an accountant or a nurse or a dentist. Rather, what a Catholic liberal arts education is trying to deal with the development of the whole personality, the whole human being, of human flourishing. And from a Catholic perspective, that includes the dimension of faith, which makes it different, say, compared to, say, secular liberal arts schools in that way. And it also, when you compare, say, a Catholic school to, say, Protestant schools, again, I think obviously it depends upon the Protestant denomination, but the Catholic perspective does assume that there's this harmony between faith and reason, and they can talk to each other.
Mm-hmm. So the importance of reason, the value given to reason, the confirmation that reason is a legitimate, way of knowing the world is one aspect. The other aspect is that is this holistic understanding of the human being, right? So both of these are part of this Catholic approach.
Yes, I would agree with that. I would actually probably add a third element to that, which is the idea of community and engaging the world. There's a strong sense and emphasis in Catholic teaching and Catholic universities of belonging and becoming part of a community, and not only becoming part of a community then to help serve the world, to engage the world, to have whether as a public citizen or doing private acts of charity, or however one engages the world in justice and wisdom. That's a crucial component of a Catholic liberal arts education.
Mm-hmm. Just to conclude this line of inquiry, do you have to be Catholic to attend Assumption University?
No, you
or
do
to teach there.
Neither. No, you don't. I believe I think only about 40% of our students are Catholic or identify as Catholic at Assumption. So they're actually a minority or plurality here at Assumption. So any student is welcome to attend Assumption University. We have students of all different types of faith and students of no faith that attend this university, but they see some value of a Catholic liberal arts education, regardless of their religious or non-religious background. As far as faculty and staff, they do not have to be Catholic to work here. And I do think they have to be mission aligned, and they want to sort of subscribe to the mission of the university of human flourishing and supporting students and being part of a community. But what their private beliefs are is for themselves.
I mean, all of these are important questions because, again, as you know, not everybody knows about these things. Not everybody knows what the Catholic University is, because obviously, but if you know that if you go to the Middle Ages, to the Renaissance, where were the first universities founded? What is the idea of a university? What is the root or the origin of the idea of a university? And you notice that this goes way back, many centuries. In fact, the university was invented as part of this whole idea that you mentioned, faith and reason, discovering the world. But again, these things, every generation, as they say, for a newborn, every joke is new, right? So
yes.
Every generation needs to rediscover these aspects. But you are now the dean of the Amour, as I would pronounce it, College of Liberal Arts and Sciences. But actually, your professional formation, your formation as an academic, as a scholar, is political science and literature. So we're going to go way back right now, and I'm going to ask you, take us to where you grew up. Where did you grow up? What was your childhood like? And when was it the first time when you became interested in either literature or political science or both?
Sure. Well, I was born in South Korea, but I was raised in Wisconsin, and I had a fairly normal childhood. I went to Catholic school, and but it really was only, I think, probably high school where I thought more about sort of college and more sort of theoretical or academic pursuits at that time. It was actually my first sort of proper job was working at a grocery store in high school, and after working there for a week, and that's tough work, and your body's sore and things of that sort. And then it made me realize that I don't want to do this the rest of my life. I should go to college. I'm more suited for an office job. And so when I went to Marquette University, which is in Milwaukee, and I initially wanted to study both English and political science, which I actually ended up graduating with a double major in political science and English. And my initial ambition was to work in politics, specifically the State Department. But in my freshman year, the spring semester of my freshman year, I took a class by Jim Rhodes, who's a political theorist at Marquette, and it really changed my life. And I wanted to study political theory ever since that moment. And I took a number of classes with Jim while I was at Marquette, and he really became sort of a mentor to me during my undergraduate career there. And then I stayed in contact with him in graduate school and thereafter. So that was a very transformative experience for me in that the introduction to political theory class that he taught. It made me realize that there was a world outside of sort of practical politics that's worth exploring. And so I did my first summer, I spent it in D.C. on the Hill because I still want to give practical politics a try. I saw it wasn't really to my liking. And then I spent the second summer as a research assistant for Jim, working on Leo Strauss and Eric Vogelin. And that's where I thought this is the right fit for me. This is sort of the path I wanted to pursue. Although, strangely enough, after I graduated, I worked in corporate consulting for a number of years. So I didn't go straight to academia. And so I worked for that in corporate consulting for a number of years. And then I decided to go to graduate school at LSU, to study under Ellis Sandoz, Cecil Eubanks, and Jim Stoner, where I wanted to write my dissertation on Vogelin. And as you know, there's really in the United States, that's the only place to study Vogelin if you want to do your doctorate there. It was at LSU at that time. So, and then from there, my first job was at Southern Utah University, where I was there for 4 years. I had a wonderful experience there. And then I spent 15 years in Saginaw, Michigan. And then I was recruited to be chair of the political science program at Samford University in Birmingham, Alabama. And now I'm just starting my first year here as dean at the Amour College at Assumption.
Well, we covered a lot of ground, but I'm going to pull you back and ask you, okay, because you knew, right? You knew that you had an inclination towards politics, especially since you wanted to join the State Department. You were interested in international politics. So why international politics? Do you remember when did you first become conscious of this interest?
I was interested in politics generally in high school. It was actually a teacher I had, Larry Cooper, a high school teacher who was a fantastic politics teacher. He was a legend known in the high school. Students would talk about how hard his class was and also what a great teacher he was. So there's, you'd have high standards and also be popular at the same time. And that would really got my interest in politics. It was a 2-semester course. So in the fall, he did domestic politics. And then in the spring, he did half of it was on international and half of it was on ideologies. So you really got a great exposure to political science when you went into college, quite frankly. And some of it, the intro classes in college were actually very easy because of the class I had with Mr. Cooper. I had specific interest in international politics because this was during the time of the Cold War. And so the threat of the Soviet Union loomed large over the public consciousness at that time. So it was always sort of on the backdrop of my mind. Probably something similar, perhaps at the turn of the 21st century on the War on Terror, in that way.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And and then literature. Obviously, you liked to read, right? That was the origin. Did you read a lot as a child?
I did, yeah. No, I enjoyed reading quite a bit as a child. Obviously, I continue onwards. I'm not sure exactly where my interest in literature sparked. It just seemed to be always part of my childhood and adulthood. I would say I really only got seriously interested in literature again in high school. I had some fantastic teacher, Mr. Cousins, who really did a Western Civ class. It was, again, very tough and very popular teacher, where you did, from Greek tragedy to, to Beckett in the 20th century. And then we had another high school teacher who did sort of more for Western culture, Western art, Western literature. And then I had some fantastic professors, English professors at Marquette, that really sort of continue my interest in literature and so on. So one of the nice things in political science is they have, if people aren't aware about, the American Political Science Association is organized by sections. And one of the sections is politics, literature, and film. So I was able to join that section and participate in it and have leadership role and been able to sort of continue my interest in literature and politics at the same time in this area. And in fact, I'll do a little plug. I'm editor of the Politics, Literature, and Film series. It was initially with Lexington Books. Lexington just been absorbed by Bloomsbury Academic. But the series has been in existence now for 11 years. And we've published over 60 books so far, and we have about a dozen projects under contract at the moment. And we do both politics and literature, politics and film, politics and TV, politics, literature, and film and TV. It's it's a fun series to run, and we've had some great authors to work with.
Indeed, you have published some great titles there, but we'll get there. I like that you cover a lot without me even asking the question. You're the best kind of conversation partner. So back to political science. So you got a degree in political science and literature. Did you get what were your specializations in political science? Did you get the political theory and comparative, or was it just political theory, or how did you do this?
Sure. So in graduate school, my first field was political theory. My second field was comparative politics, and then my third area was American politics. And so that was well, that's what I took my comprehensive exams on in those 3 areas. And then at that time, you had to also do an ancient and modern language. So my ancient language was Greek, and my modern language was Russian. And my dissertation at that time was really a fusion of theory and comparative politics. I looked at church-state relations in Russia from 988 to 2000, applying Eric Voegelin's theory of symbolization on that, and how that the symbols of church and state and how that sort of ebbed and flowed and evolved over that period of time. So it was an interesting project of trying, not doing just something purely theory or purely empirical, but trying to marry the two together and see what results from that. And I would say that's part of what I've been trying to do. I would say in most of my career is I enjoy theory. I enjoy theory quite a bit, and it's obviously needed and required to do a robust political science. But at the same time, I do want to be grounded in the empirical world as well.
Well, that's kind of in line with what we talked about earlier about the holistic approach, right? The holistic approach to understanding human existence, to understanding society. We are not sectioned into subfields in our real life. we might be in the academia, but we're trying to obviously bypass that, and this, the reason why I'm inquiring into all these, origin stories is because all of these actually play out in your career. All of these actually play out in the scholarly fields in which you've been involved, as we'll see. Because you worked on issues about Russian politics and Central and Eastern Europe. You worked on issues about religion and politics. And another aspect, because you keep mentioning the importance, the formative impact that these specific educators had on your life, clearly you have thought very consciously about that fact and about how important education is, the challenges facing education. So, and we can clearly see the sort of the trajectory, why everything you've been doing, sort of has been a consequence of all these experiences that you have taken on board and followed through. So let's talk a little bit before we go back to the scholarly part. The activity, the work of teaching. You've been teaching for a long time. Meaning you have an extensive experience of teaching at various schools in various parts of the country. By the way, not as varied as me, but you're okay. But you've been teaching in at various types of schools, state schools, small liberal arts schools, and then a Catholic university now. So what is the sort of a summary of your summum bonum of all these experiences? What have you learned from teaching at all these different kinds of schools, at different regions, different generations? What can you share in that regard?
Oh, I think there's many ways to think about teaching, or many different approaches to teaching. Let me provide this sort of metaphor as a way perhaps to summarize the experiences. I think there's really 2 types of teachers. There's if you're on a hill, the teacher's on the top of the hill and the student's at the bottom. One way of teaching is having this teacher sort of beckon the student to climb up the hill and have the student meet the teacher on the top of the hill. The other way of teaching is the teacher comes down halfway down the hill and help the students walk the way up on top of the hill. I think both approaches are valid, and it really depends, I think, on the circumstances that you find yourself in. So in some cases, are you at a public institution versus a private institution? Because you are attracting different type of students. Are the classes you're teaching, is it an introduction class or is it an elective? What is the cap size? Is the number of students you have at 75? I've taught in classes where you have 75 students, or is it a seminar where you have 6 or 8? What is the subject that you're teaching, and what is the appropriate assessment to use for that subject? So I tend to take approach that I think for teachers, they have to be, advocate for teachers to be flexible, to be aware of the circumstances that they find themselves, and to adjust their pedagogy accordingly. A sort of one-size-fit-all, I don't think doesn't work anymore. It may have worked probably 30, 40 years ago when professors and teachers were held in esteem and publicly respected. I don't think that's the case anymore. I think teachers are still respected, but they're not as highly esteemed as they were in the past. And part of this has to do with the sort of the consumer mentality of students, for better or worse. And so teachers need to, I think today, teachers need to reach students where they are and then adjust their pedagogy accordingly, depending upon what the circumstances they find themselves. And I say this from my own experience. I tend to, in the beginning of my career, I tend to be that sort of teacher that's on top of the hill and stay down top of the hill. And through the years, I've learned that I've had to go down halfway down the hill and help walk the students up the hill themselves. And I think that's part of it's probably maturity on my side, on my part, but I think also part of it is the changing nature of students in higher education today.
Yeah, I mean, as an educator, as a teacher, you never stop developing yourself either. You always change, and you always have to change because it's like it's the endless process of learning. Speaking of teaching, and because you have published on this issue, both essays and scholarly papers and so on, what do you think are some of the, and this is a broad question, so you can take it however you want, in whichever direction you want. What do you think are some salient challenges facing, let's say, education or higher education in the United States right now? And this is, it couldn't be a broader question, but it allows you to, address it however you want.
Sure, I think there's multiple challenges at hand. So I think the first question really is an existential question for faculty is, why are you teaching? Are you teaching primarily for the care and love of the student? Are you teaching just to make ends meet? Are you teaching to inflate your ego? I think that's the first question I would sort of ask is what why is the faculty member teaching? What is his or her purpose in doing so in that way? Then I think there's probably sort of, for lack of a better word, bureaucratic questions at hand. So there's questions of compliance issues, and how do you deal with that in terms of students with disabilities, students with that have Title IX issues, students so on with technology issues. As I've taught over, I've noticed in the last 25 years that I've taught, when I first taught 25 years ago, my syllabus was about 2 pages. Now it's probably 7 or 8 pages, and 2/3 of that is compliance issues, right, that you have to put in. So the idea of the teacher just teaching his or her class, it's more than that now, right? You're doing other things on top of that. You have sort of these compliance issues imposed upon the faculty member, whether they want to or not, and they have some knowledge of that and how to navigate those things dealing with students. I think a third issue is technology, and whether it's online classes, hybrid classes, asynchronous, synchronous, the role of AI, things of that sort. How do we adapt and how do we use technology or don't use technology in our pedagogy? And then I think finally would be the role of assessment. It's I think for better or worse, it's becoming sort of a constant theme, and becoming even more so in higher education, of how do we assess student learning. I think there's limitations to it. I think it's needed, but there's also we have to realize there's limitations to it, and the idea that sort of the default of quantitative assessing is not necessarily the best way to assess students, and we should look at other ways to assessing students that are perhaps more accurate or more appropriate depending upon the subject matter.
I would add 2 other items that just came to mind and ask your opinion about these issues. So the first thing that we just mentioned is the fragmentation of the disciplines, separation into silos, the fragmentation of the whole process of, from university to something very micro and because obviously we're obsessed with, method and so on, and being following the method, sometimes forgetting what we're looking at, or what we want to actually find, or what is the goal of the method. So the point being that although we call them ourselves universities, for me, it's because my profile is very similar to yours. I'm also interdisciplinary, as you well know, and I both write and publish and teach things that straddle borders, not because I want to confuse the borders, but because I want to make the borders clearer and to understand the relationship between the different fields, be it religion and politics, be it movies and politics, or music and politics, which is a class I'm teaching right now. So the idea here is that we have lost the holistic, what we mentioned, the holistic approach to education and sort of what is the actual outcome. And of course, this has to do with the ton of bureaucratic administrative things that you need to do before you even start teaching. It has to do with the fragmentation of the discipline. But from my part, I found that you need to create institutions or institutional frameworks that specifically set as a goal to be holistic. And in what you mentioned in the secular university, usually these are the honors colleges where you can best do these. It's the honors colleges, or maybe they have some specialized majors that kind of do this sort of interdisciplinary stuff. And as you mentioned at Assumption University, this is part of the entire mission. So that's one issue. How do you see this challenge of not forgetting that it's actually about human flourishing, as you said, and not about teaching to the method?
Yeah, I think it's a great point you make here, and it's you have this idea of specialization, which not only fragments a discipline but also fragments a college. And so at Assumption University, we have at the Amour College of Liberal Arts and Sciences, we have 13 colleges, or 13 departments in our program that range from art and music, the fine arts, the humanities, of foreign languages and history and philosophy and theology, to the physical sciences of biology and mathematics and computer science, to pre-professional programs such as health and human services and education. So the question is, how do you find a way to deal with, how do you find a way so that these departments and faculty can talk to each other and have a common language, a common discourse? And so one of the reasons why I was interested in moving in sort of administration of higher education is to sort of how to tackle this problem and try to find ways, sort of in a practical sort of way, of how to create a sense of community among these sort of disparate disciplines or disparate departments, as it were. I think there's some, part of it is obviously, as you mentioned before, is one way of doing it is through interdisciplinary programs like honors, or an interdisciplinary program of X or Y. I think there's both a strength and a weakness to that. I think the reality is that when you have an interdisciplinary program, if it's not tied to a department, it tends to be personality driven, and once that person is left or retires, that program dies, or it, more likely it limps on forever and ever, but nothing happens to it. And honors programs, I think, are useful too, but the issue with honors program, it tends to only deal with elite students, and so what do you do with the other 80% of students that aren't in the honors program, in that way? So it does raise a question. I think one of the things that we're trying to work on here at the Amour College is try to find sort of really common questions that we can address and approach it from a multidisciplinary perspective. That's one approach. We will actually start our strategic planning next academic year. This is my first year here, so I'm really here to listen and learn from the other departments. But once I have a good sense, I'm hoping in year 2 that we can come to some sort of unified vision of what it means to be at the Amour College of Liberal Arts and Sciences. What is a Catholic liberal arts education? So, if you ask me in a year from now, I'll probably have a better answer for you. But I think there's also practical things you can do, for example, such as when faculty or when departments send in the request for a faculty hire, make it clear, and I've made it clear to faculty that we're not just replacing someone who specialized in this particular area, but actually we want probably a generalist, or even better, someone who can teach outside of his or her own department. We want to be able to favor research that is not just sort of narrowly defined, but can also be broadly addressed an audience. And the dean is in a role to sort of encourage that and put standards and evaluations and incentives to nudge faculty in that direction.
Mm-hmm. That's excellent. I mean, that's exactly what I was looking to see how, based on your experience in your current job, how you approach this. And this is a very informative answer in that regard. Thank you. And you mentioned this, and I actually wanted to point this out, the importance of sort of building on what you said, the importance of hiring the right people in the best, understood in the best way. Meaning, if the faculty themselves don't have a holistic understanding, for lack of a better words, of what education is about, that truly it's about the human flourishing, then it's very hard to construct anything. But because first of all, they're going to comply, formally, fill the forms, sign the papers, but they're not going to do it. So I think that finding the people who are truly convinced and understand that their methodology and discipline has a role, but has a role within a broader understanding and with a broader pursuit. That's crucial, as you just said. And the second thing that I was, that came to mind talking about education is, I'm sure you as well have encountered so many dedicated faculty. So many faculty from all walks, from all kinds of disciplines, and walks of life, in the sense of at various positions in the academic hierarchy. And so their dedication did not depend on where they found themselves in the respective hierarchy. But however, the negative part of this, or the dark side, the flip side, is that I have very often seen, unfortunately, that these were people, often some such people were not supported enough, not appreciated enough, their work hasn't been given the support needed to actually flourish. And it might be a simple adjunct, so someone who only teaches a class or two because of whatever circumstances, but who'd go way over and beyond the call of duty, so to speak, who do all kinds of other projects. So this is an ongoing thing that continues to bother me, because clearly there's something wrong in the mechanism, in the structure, that we don't, because these are the people, right, as we talked about, who are the seeds of creating such a flourishing university as we were talking about.
No, I agree. It's very difficult to I think find those type of faculties, and when you do find them, to try to hold on to them and support them and help them flourish themselves. I think from the dean's perspective, it's very difficult, because a lot of the faculty, a lot of your evaluation of faculties are through committees and chairs and second-handed. I've just finished around this semester of doing in-class evaluations of faculties who are going up for tenure or promotion. But again, that's only that's a snapshot of one time, and especially as a new person, you don't have the history of each faculty member. I will say also, one of the things that have surprised me, though in retrospect it shouldn't have, but what surprised me in this position is the amount of time we spent on adjuncts in terms of hiring and retaining them and developing them. It shouldn't have surprised me now that, because as you well know, that in American higher education, tenure track faculty at universities are now less than 50%. So actually, most of the faculty that teach at universities are adjunct in this way. An assumption we're better. About 40% of our faculty are adjunct, so we're better than the national trend. But still, that's 40% of your time being spent on that population, and they tend to be more contingent, and it's more difficult to find ways to evaluate them and support them and help them flourish as well. So it is a difficult problem. I don't think there's going to be any easy solution to it, just because by its very nature, it's a labor-intensive process, and there's not any sort of easy way to find shortcuts to that. I mean, you have student evaluations and things of that sort, but we know the limited values of those type of evaluations, and so it really, in many ways, it depends on having a strong culture in place at the department level, where those things are encouraged and supported and incentivized for faculty.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, I can see that. But I think it is important, as you said, to have the right people in the right position, for example, at the department level, at various leadership levels, because they are the ones who channel basically the linchpins, right, between the sort of the overall goal of the university and what's happening on the ground. And if the linchpin is not working, if their vision is not open, if they don't encourage the right people, then the communication breaks, because as a dean, you only have a filtered view of the whole thing. But speaking of that, as a dean, you are a leader, right? I know it's maybe it's early, but if I were to ask you, you might have been asked in the interview process, what is your leadership philosophy? Do you have like a motto or something, like a guiding sort of a philosophy as a leader?
Sure. I mean, when I was in my job interview for this position, and it also has the benefit of being true, I subscribe to what's called the service leadership model, which really, I see my role as the dean is to create the conditions and resources so our faculty and staff can flourish, and they can do their job well. And so my role as dean is to make sure that they have those resources and that they have the conditions and they feel valued so they can do their job well, and in turn they can help transform student lives and produce scholarship and engage in their communities in that way. It's also, I would say, it's organic. I don't, we're not a corporation. I've worked in corporate consulting. I know how the private sector works, and some of those techniques don't translate into academia, because in academia you have a shared governance model. So I can say all sorts of things I want. I can send all sorts of dictates I wanted to, but you know how that works. Chairs or faculty members say, like, okay, whatever, and then they ignore it and do their own thing. So it requires the dean to meet faculty and staff where they are, to have those conversations, to be collegial, to have the process emerge organically, to have a collaborative and collective decision-making model, so everyone can buy into it. Not everyone can buy into it 100%. There's going to be compromises and things of that sort, and you probably even have some faculty and some departments not buying into it at all, and that happens. But as dean, you're trying to really work within that shared governance model to help them see that, understand what their interests are, and have their interests aligned with the college and the university interests, and find ways to promote that. And that requires a type of creativity and innovation and entrepreneurship as well. And so I would say those are sort of the key values and sort of the models of approaching. I see as dean, it's approaching my job here at this college, and we have to be aware that it is a shared governance model, and really, I can only be effective if my faculty and staff are effective, and for them to be effective, they need to have the resources, the appreciation, and support to do that.
Yes, and I like the fact that you mentioned both resources and appreciation and support, which is not the same thing. And both are needed, indeed. We talked about this before, but you didn't end up in your current position. You didn't start your current position as a result of a happenstance, but there's a long trajectory. If someone goes over your resume, for example, your CV, of being involved in institutional construction, in institution building. Right, from you've been taken leadership positions and active participation, as you said, in parts of the American Political Science Association subgroups, and then all kinds of civic and academic initiatives. And I mean, there's such a long list that I'm not going to go into it. You have your whole CV there, but and also in publishing, right? So clearly, for me, I see that you've been this part of, as I said, building things. The part of putting your shoulder there, the part of building institution has been part of your profile. And an important part of this, as you mentioned, was your publishing activity. That's a fascinating thing that we don't often get a glance into. So, and you've been leading, the collection on politics, literature and film at Lexington now. What is it? Bloomsbury Academic. What does it mean to basically coordinate a publishing house? Well, not a publishing house, but a publishing line. What does it mean to be a publisher, an editor, a publisher leading such an initiative?
Sure. So I'm besides being the editor of the Politics, Literature, and Film series, as you know, I also was editor of the online magazine Vogel and View for 5 years. I worked as associate editor for the online magazine Law and Liberty, and various other type of activities in the publishing world. It's for me primarily I would say regarding sort of all my sort of professional activities or professional leadership activities are really driven from a sense of curiosity. I was so regard to the Politics, Literature, and Film book series, I was just always curious on how a book was actually published. Right, you write the book and you send it off. Yeah, I've done that. I know how that works. But what happens after that? It sort of it goes into a black box, and then 8 months later it comes out on Amazon. What happens in those 8 months? And so that was really drove me to be curious about how that process worked. I had I had conversations with editors at other university presses, people like Steve Wren, who's now at Notre Dame, and just talking about the process and how it works and what happens and how do you organize it. And then I was very fortunate to give an opportunity 11 years ago at Lexington, who asked if I was interested in creating a series. And I said, sure. I mean, it sounds really interesting. And so I could learn what happens between that 8 months after you submit your manuscript, how that process works and what actually goes into creating the book itself. And so during that, it's a huge learning curve. And I was very fortunate to have great staff to work with at Lexington, and still do. And so we have this process. It's pretty professionalized and pretty almost automated at this point now. But it requires a lot of organization and stay on top of projects, on multiple projects. So as I said before, we have about a dozen projects under contract at the moment. So you got to see where each project is, at its various stages, and check in with authors, say, and very politely, but firmly say, how are things going? Going to meet the deadline, or do you need more time? Things of that sort. And then also working with referees. Can you send out the manuscript for review, and are you going to get the report back on time, and so on and so forth, and then working with copy editors and production and design and things of that sort. So it's a multifaceted process with a lot of moving actors and parts to it. And it really requires, I think, a person to be very organized and on top of things, but also not get lost, be on top of the minutia, but not get lost in it. Be able to also stand back and see the big picture as well. And so in some ways that, being an editor of the Politics, Literature, Film book series, being editor of Vogel and View, and being a leader in some of these other professional projects have been really good experience, I think, and helped me in becoming a dean, because you're doing something very similar. As a dean, you're looking over 13 departments, and you're seeing where people are at various stages and checking, and you want to check in and encourage them and give them support and appreciation when needed, and at other times be firm and push them in other cases. And so it's, in many ways, I think being an editor or leading, say, civic initiatives, it requires it is a shared governance model. It requires volunteer work, and so you don't have, again, it's not the private sector where you can sort of fire people and hire people at will. I've been in that world, and I know what that world is. But it requires a lot more of interpersonal skills and persuasion, human relations, relationship buildings. Those are key components to being successful.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And speaking of, all these, all the various endeavors in which you've been involved throughout your career. At the same time, the sheer number is truly impressive, and also the quality of them, because all of these, Lexington Books has published excellent books. Vogel in View has been doing some great work by being, doing like applied theory, like so bringing theory to the masses, so to speak. I mean, all of these things, but doing all of these at the same time and doing it at a high level, which I think you've been doing, genuinely think so, requires discipline, and that's a huge discipline, and maybe other things. So how do you handle this? How do you organize your life? I mean, even as a scholar, right? There's this, I like to read about how Balzac organized his day, right? Because he's the most prolific writer in history, like quality writer. Because other people have written other garbage, but he's the most prolific, top writer in history. How did he do that? So how do you do this? How do you maintain this discipline and this intensity? Because it's we all have only 24 hours in the day.
Well, thank you. That's very kind of you to say. I think the key, at least for me, the key element is really to have working with the right people and the right team. It's not necessarily doing all of it yourself, and learning when to delegate things and when to stay on top of things, and when to do things yourself. I think that's a key component, because you're right. You can't do everything yourself. There's only so many hours in the day, and if you were able to do everything yourself, you burn out very quickly. And so you need to find the right people to work with, and build trust, and learn to delegate and trust their judgment in that way. I think one of the interesting things coming here as dean is that I don't know really anyone coming to this college, and so you have to and so I have to act out of trust first. I have to extend that trust to people first and say, listen, I trust you, and if you make a mistake, that's fine. Just let me know. Mistakes happen, and we'll work through it and continue on. And trust takes, as you know, time to develop and to build with people. But I think if you start from a place of trust, in my experience, most people, not all people, but most people respond very positively, and you can do a lot of things at a very high quality. Whether that's in publication, right, or in leadership, or even teaching in some ways. And teaching itself is a type of trust. When you come into it, you're trusting the students that they're there for a reason, and they want to do well. Even if you're teaching, for example, a general education course, right? And I used to teach the Introduction to Political Science class when I was in Michigan, and 90% of those students, none of them were political science majors or minors. They just had to take the class because of the general education requirement. But if you go in there starting from a place of trust and thinking, and believing that they want to learn, and they're there, and they're curious, and they want to be taught, and I think students instinctively can sense that from professors, and then most of them will respond positively. Not all of them. Right, not all, and that it is what it is, and human beings are what they are. But if you get 80%, 85% of them to respond positively in a classroom or a committee meeting, or working on edited volume, that's a pretty successful batting average.
I agree. And it's funny that the same applies to any sort of leadership, no matter whether the members of the group are students or adults or faculty. It's like in role of faculty members in a course, and you see the same dynamics as you see between the students. It's quite hilarious. So back to the scholarship part. Now, obviously, you started this position. You're learning by doing. Obviously, you have a broad experience and deep experience of leadership, but still, this is a new endeavor in a new place. You will focus on this, but I know for sure that the scholarship will not disappear from your endeavors. You didn't abandon it, knowing your profile, but probably it's on a back burner for now to the degree to which you can do that. Knowing that, and sort of framing it that way, still, what are some of the issues that you've been thinking about, you plan to write about? What in the realm of thinking, of scholarship, where are you right now? What are some of the things on the back burner?
Sure. So I've just actually finished a revise and resubmit of an article on Thomas Mann's Magic Mountain. So that'll be coming out, I think, next year, in the anniversary of Thomas Mann's. And so that was on looking at the role of the body and how the body reacts and how characters relate to their body in the novel. And those who accept the condition of the bodies tend to have a more positive outcome, and those who tend to be in denial or reject what their body's telling them tends to have a negative outcome. Let's put it that way. So that's been put to bed, and I'm looking forward to that coming out. That was done by some colleagues at the University of St. Gallen who had a wonderful symposium last summer on Thomas Mann. I've been asked to contribute a chapter on an edited volume on political science, teaching and learning. They want that in June. They want me to write a chapter on political theory, so I'll be thinking about some of the issues, the pedagogical issues of political theory, from sort of curriculum design to program design to actual delivery in the classroom. And then the third project is I am working on a manuscript on the relationship between Christianity and citizenship, and so that's still in its sort of early stages, but I'm doing some exploration of that. I think it seems to be a timely subject with the rise of Christian nationalism, and then also the rise of the nuns, N-O-N-E-S, right? So we have this weird situation in the United States where we have, sort of this ultra ideological bent of sort of Christianity, and then sort of the disappearance of Christianity in our population. And so is there a middle ground to be held in between? So I'm going to try to explore that.
Mm-hmm. What can you tell me a little bit more about this? What is the because clearly, I mean, you said what is the dilemma? What is the where does citizenship play a role here? Do you see citizenship as that middle?
It can be. I'm still in the early stage of it, so I don't want to say anything definitive at this point. But I think another way to think about it is that there's some religious believers who who fuse religion and politics together as one. Right. This is sort of the Christian nationalist narrative: is that you're Christian and a nationalist and a hyper patriot American. And there's others who see there's no connection between the two. You can be a citizen and not have any religious beliefs, or have religious beliefs, but they're not connected in any way to your role as a citizen. I think there's probably the more difficult one is that there is some relationship, but what is that relationship? And religion in some ways can inform what it means to be a citizen, in some ways it can't. And where do we pick and choose our points on that? And I think that's a more difficult and nuanced approach, but it seems to me in some ways perhaps the correct one. But that's a hypothesis that's worth exploring for the next couple of years.
Yeah, and I mean, Augustine of Hippo, right? He did help us a lot with the city of God and earthly city, but I also think he didn't help us a lot, because the earthly city is sort of a mangled concept, and not mangled, sort of a mishmash of all kinds of things. It's not very clear whether it's a citizenship, or whether it's the thing that leads to a different the negative end to is the wrong choice. So I think that the clarification of the earthly city is still to be done, so to speak. And I think that's that's kind of the how I see the direction of such an inquiry, right? So what does it actually mean, right? And of course, many people have written on that, but I would have liked for Augustine to push it a little bit further. But faculty members, academics are also human beings. This might come as a shock, but it's true. So as human beings, they have a private life beyond the work, beyond academia, beyond their teaching and learning and scholarship. So what are other aspects of the life of lead Trepanier that we don't know about? What do you like to do in your free time, as much as that is in your private time? Let me put it this way. What are other endeavors, curiosities, things you like to pursue?
Well, I'm a very boring person. That's why I'm so productive. No, I mean, my wife is a classical pianist, and so we like going to classical concerts, go to art museums, sort of cultural events, theater, things of that sort. My wife and I also like to hike a lot. We're avid hikers as well, and also travel too. We travel to see friends and family, but also just travel to see new places as well. So I would say there's nothing particularly. I wouldn't say that's anything particularly probably exciting or hopefully not too unusual. And then I used to, but I don't have the time anymore. But I used to watch the Green Bay Packers play, but I watch just the YouTube highlights. So.
Yeah, well, if you're not there, it's hard to you can put the cheese head on your head, but it's still not.
That's right.
For example, you just moved to Massachusetts. You like to discover new things. What's the best thing you've discovered since you moved there?
I think it's the people, which is surprising because New Englanders have a reputation of being sort of standoffish and cold, but that hasn't been the experience for me and my wife. We actually found them to be very friendly and warm, very straightforward, which we don't mind, which I can see for some people that may seem abrupt. I think finding the people here is probably the most surprising thing of it. I mean, there's a tremendous cultural resources here. There's obviously the historical resources here are tremendous. I mean, you have, for example, not even towns, but homes that were built before the Revolution and things of that sort. So and now we're in peak season with the autumn colors. So it's very beautiful. It's very similar to the Upper Midwest where I grew up in, but where this is really sort of the best time of the year to be in. But I think that's probably the most surprising thing is just how welcoming the people have been.
I mean, you just mentioned the autumn colors. I must say that I have never seen such beautiful autumn colors as in the Twin Cities in Minnesota, which I didn't expect, but just an incredible palette. Of course, the New England is famous for that, but I'm just saying I didn't expect it in the Midwest, but it's astonishingly beautiful. What's the last great movie you've seen, and why? Why that?
Last great movie I've seen. Gosh, that's
doesn't
a
have
good one.
to be a new movie. Doesn't have to be a new movie. Just
no. It sounds a bit cliched. Parasite is probably the last one I've seen in the theater that struck a chord with me. Another Korean film that's that I enjoyed. I saw it on DVD. It's about probably I think maybe over 10 years old. It's Poetry, which is a beautiful film about a woman, a grandmother in rural Korea who's suffering from dementia, and she takes poetry to help her, live a meaningful life. And she's also taking care of her grandson because the mother's in Seoul working at a job, and there's sort of a tragic event that happens there. But that was a very beautiful film. Another film, which is again older, The Lives of Others, the German film, which is obviously a beautiful film. I can't think of anything sort of recent. To be honest with you, I haven't been. I used to watch cinema quite a bit, but the last few years between moving and the new position, I just haven't had time, to be honest with you.
As with
but-
everything else, you have to make time. You have to set aside time for
That's
these
right.
things. It really is. You have to schedule entertainment. You have to schedule it in your day, because otherwise it doesn't happen. As we all know. Why did you? Yeah, go ahead.
I was gonna say one. I've had it's not a movie, but it's a TV series, The Bear, which I would strongly recommend if you haven't seen it. So it's about a sandwich shop in Chicago that's trying to make do and then later try to reinvent itself. And I think it's one of the probably the more memorable television shows I've seen for some time.
Absolutely. It's still going on. I think they just started the new season. Did you just see The Lives of Others for the first time recently?
No. I saw it when it came out. Was it 2007 or 2008? Yeah. But it's still one of those films that stays with me.
Absolutely. It is an incredible film. And no, it's not by chance that it got the Oscar for foreign movie. Usually the foreign movie category it chooses better than the domestic movie category. I can say that. If you like The Lives of Others, I don't know if you've seen it, but I warmly recommend. I just saw it last week. Cold War. Now, since we're all interested about, we have shared interest in Cold War and Central and Eastern Europe. Both of you have interest in that area. If you haven't seen Cold War, which is about Poland in the Cold War, but it's a personal story of relationship, but it's also a story about music. Interestingly enough, and it's also photographed. I have not seen such beautiful shots since Tarkovsky. So it is, and I mean it. It is truly a poem on film. For a certain reason, it didn't hit as hard as The Lives of Others, and you'll see why. But it is one of the most astonishingly beautiful and intricate movies I have seen in a long, long time. So I warmly recommend that. But Parasite also got the Oscar for the foreign language movie. Why did you like it specifically?
It's just beautifully shot. It's beautifully shot. You could tell every frame is well thought out in terms of the angles and the position of people and the blocking. And the story itself, I think, which is I think typical of sort of Korean or South Korean television and movies is a combination of genres. They don't seem to be fixated as we tend to be in the West on sort of genre. It has to be this, it has to be that. They're happy to mix in the comedy and tragedy and the ridiculousness of life in between, which in some ways I think is probably more reflective of how life is.
Absolutely. The holistic approach that we talked
That's right.
about. So what do you say, speaking of South Korean culture, which has really burst into the forefront of pop culture in so many ways, movies, the Korean dramas, meaning sort of the telenovelas, of the Korean kind. And by the way, there's also Turkish telenovelas, which are very popular in Europe, which people might not know.
Okay.
But it's the same sort of thing. And also K-pop, right? What do you make of this huge sort of import of an interest and genuine interest? I have students who say that's their favorite music or whatever. So what do you make of that? What are you thinking about that? Like, what were what's the context? Why did it happen? I don't know.
So it's sort of an interesting story. It actually began in the 90s when Jurassic Park was released in the cinema, and then the Korean government did an analysis, and it's something they realized, like, there's one movie made, is the equivalent of selling 3 million Kia cars or something like that. So we need to go in the cultural industry, and so the K way, or the Korean pop culture is actually, it's interesting because it's a government invested industry. So unlike, say, it's very similar, I suppose, to France in that way. Unlike the United States or in Britain, where we tend to rely on the private sector or nonprofits to promote culture, this is been government invested, and it was seen as a way as a program to export for economic and soft power reasons to do that. I think it's also important to recognize that South Korea is a small country And so its domestic market is not enough to sustain itself. It has to actually, for those industries to be profitable, they have to export it outside their country. So they make it they're more open and amenable to global influences, say as compared to Japan, which is a huge market, and they can just serve, they do things that are specifically Japanese and serve their own customers in that way. So I think those are some of the reasons why I think our drive for the Korean pop culture. I mean, hopefully, with the recent Nobel Prize in Literature, Hong Kong, people will see more of sort of the high end of Korean culture and see what they also contribute, especially in classical music. Loon Chan Lim, for example, won the Clyburn, and you have a number of noted Korean pianists that have made a sort of global impact in the world. So I think it's hopefully South Korea will be known more than just pop culture. Not that there's anything wrong with it, but they have something more to offer than just that.
Yeah, I mean, and obviously, I mean, pop culture by its very nature has the greatest impact. I mean, the widest impact, not the greatest, but has the widest impact. And it is, you need an entry point somewhere, right? But that's very, very, very interesting what you're saying, because it goes into, issues like, the role of the political dimension of all these cultural phenomena, right? And this is why we teach classes like, sport and politics. It's a class it's a class that I teach, but because it's often we don't see that dimension, what an important role it plays and how it changes everything. Indeed. So I think we have covered a lot, and thank you for taking time. Which on a holiday, I know you have a day off, and thank you for your editing team, your production team, for helping us out during a day off. I think we have learned a tremendous lot, and we did exactly what I wanted to do in this conversation, to give a picture of an academic who has really tapped into all the aspects, by virtue of your personal trajectory, into all the facets of academic life, from the scholarly one, the teaching one, the administrative one, and the sort of institutional building one. And I think we managed to tap into all of these, and I'm really grateful for all the insights that you gave us about all these aspects.
Right. Well, thank you for having me. It's been a wonderful conversation, and I hope we can do it again soon.